What happens when a Hollywood icon known for his calm, calculated composure suddenly reaches his breaking point? Live on daytime television. Before we step into the fire, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, like this video, and drop a comment below. Because what unfolded on that stage is the kind of moment people talk about for years. The studio lights were blinding that morning. The polished glass table reflected every movement, every nervous glance, every shifting note card. The audience at the View buzzed with anticipation, unaware they were about to witness something far more intense than a routine celebrity interview. He walked out to applause, measured, confident, flashing that familiar half-smile. Ben Affleck took his seat with the relaxed posture of a man who has faced 1,000 cameras before. His suit was charcoal gray, crisp. His expression? Guarded but polite. Across the table sat Sunny Hostin, poised, sharp-eyed, flipping through her notes with the precision of a litigator preparing for cross-examination. At first, everything followed the script. Pleasantries. A joke about jet lag. A light exchange about his latest film project. The audience laughed on cue. Ben leaned back slightly, fingers interlocked, answering questions with smooth professionalism. But there was something in Sunny's gaze, an intensity. She wasn't there for safe questions. "And your performance," she began, tilting her head slightly, "has been described as raw, almost autobiographical. Some critics say it mirrors parts of your personal life, especially the struggles." The air shifted. Ben's smile thinned just slightly. "Well," he replied evenly, "as an actor, you draw from experience. That's part of the job." Sunny nodded, but didn't look satisfied. "Of course. But when your private life becomes so public, do you ever feel that the line between performance and reality disappears?" A few murmurs from the audience. Ben's fingers tightened against each other. His jaw flexed. "I think," he said carefully, "that everyone deserves some separation between their work and their personal life." The tone had changed. Subtle but undeniable. Sunny leaned forward. "But you've spoken openly in the past about accountability. About growth. So when headlines resurface, when people question whether real change has happened, what do you say to them?" The question hung like smoke. For a split second, his eyes flickered. Not confusion. Not surprise. Something else. Fatigue, maybe. Or irritation long buried. "I say," he replied slowly, "that growth isn't a performance. It's not something you prove on a talk show." The audience shifted in their seats. Sunny didn't retreat. "But when you're a public figure, isn't that part of the responsibility?" Transparency. The word transparency seemed to echo. Ben leaned forward now. No more leaning back comfortably. His elbows rested on the table. His voice lowered, not louder but sharper. "There's a difference between transparency and interrogation." A collective inhale rippled through the room. Sunny held her composure. "No one is interrogating you." "It feels like it," he shot back, faster this time. "You invite someone here to talk about their work, and suddenly we're dissecting every mistake they've ever made." The temperature in the room had risen 10 degrees. One of the co-hosts shifted awkwardly, attempting a light chuckle. It died instantly. Sunny's expression hardened, not angry but firm. With respect, when your actions have impacted others, viewers want answers. They want authenticity. "And I've given that," Ben replied, his voice now edged with frustration. "Over and over. In interviews, in statements, in my work. At some point, you either believe someone is trying to do better, or you don't." The applause that followed wasn't unanimous. It was scattered, uneasy. Sunny crossed her arms lightly on the table. Some would argue that words are easier than change. There it was. The snap didn't come as a shout. It came as a crack in composure. "You know what's easy," he said, eyes locked onto hers. "Sitting behind a desk and reducing someone's entire life to headlines." Gasps. A camera cut to the audience. Wide eyes, frozen smiles. Sunny blinked, taken aback for the first time. "That's not what's happening." "It feels like it," he repeated, firmer now. "You talk about accountability like it's a soundbite. You don't see the work. The private work. The hard days. The therapy. The rebuilding." The word therapy trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from intensity. The studio was silent now. No rustling. No coughing. Just the hum of lights. Sunny straightened. "No one is dismissing personal work. But public figures influence culture. That influence comes with scrutiny." "And scrutiny," Ben responded, "shouldn't mean perpetual punishment." The phrase landed heavy. A producer offstage gestured subtly. signaling for a commercial break that was still 30 seconds away. Sunny softened her tone slightly. Do you feel punished? He exhaled through his nose. For a moment, the anger faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. I feel, he said quietly, like no matter how much you try to grow, some people need you to stay frozen in your worst moment. Because it fits a narrative. The audience shifted again, this time not in discomfort, but in reflection. Sunny paused, studying him. Is that what you think I'm doing? There it was. The human question beneath the television exchange. Ben hesitated. I think, he said carefully now, that sometimes conversations like this stop being about understanding and start being about proving a point. A producer's voice echoed faintly. And we're clear. But the cameras were still rolling. Sunny inhaled, then spoke more softly. My job is to ask difficult questions, not comfortable ones. And my job, he replied, is to show up and answer them honestly, not be defined by them forever. The applause this time was louder. Divided but louder. One co-host finally stepped in. I think what we're seeing here is a real conversation about growth and public perception. But the energy had already shifted into something irreversible. Ben leaned back at last, though not in relaxation. His expression had changed. The guarded politeness from the beginning was gone. In its place was rawness. Sunny adjusted her papers, but she wasn't flipping pages anymore. She was thinking. The tension lingered like static electricity. And in living rooms across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Because something real had cracked through the polished surface of daytime television. Not a scandal. Not an insult. Something more dangerous. Honesty. But honesty, especially in the glare of studio lights, is unpredictable. As the show cut to commercial, the audience erupted, not in chaos, but in urgent whispers. Some clapped in support. Others shook their heads. A few simply stared at the stage, stunned. Ben removed his earpiece briefly, rubbing his temples. Sunny sipped water, her composure intact, but her expression thoughtful. No one had expected this segment to turn into a confrontation. And yet it had. When the cameras returned, would they smooth it over? Or would the crack widen? Because sometimes when pressure builds long enough, it doesn't explode. It fractures. And the fracture had only just begun. The red light blinked back on. 3, 2, 1. The applause sign lit up again, but this time the clapping felt different. Less automatic, more cautious. The kind of applause that asks a question instead of celebrating an answer. The camera glided across the panel. Sunny's posture was composed, shoulders squared, hands folded neatly over her notes. But her eyes weren't on the teleprompter. They were on Ben. Ben sat still, jaw set, eyes forward. The commercial break hadn't softened anything. If anything, it had intensified it. He had removed his jacket during the pause, sleeves now slightly rolled up. Not dramatically, but enough to suggest comfort had been replaced by resolve. Welcome back, Sunny said, voice steady but quieter than before. We're here with Ben Affleck, and we were having a very candid conversation about growth, accountability, and public perception. Candid. The word lingered. Ben nodded once. That we were. A few light chuckles from the audience. Nervous, unsure which side laughter belonged to. Sunny shifted slightly in her chair. Ben, I want to clarify something. My intention isn't to define you by your past. It's to understand how someone navigates such intense public scrutiny. Ben turned to face her fully now. Not confrontational. Direct. I get that, he said. I really do. But there's a pattern that happens. Every time I sit down for something like this, no matter what project I'm there to promote, it circles back. Always. Sunny responded immediately. Because it resonates with people. And so does the work, he countered, gesturing subtly. The film. The craft. The reason I'm here. The audience murmured again. The divide was becoming visible, some nodding with him, others leaning toward Sunny's perspective. Sunny tapped her pen lightly against her notes. But don't you think your personal journey is part of the story? Especially when you've spoken about it publicly before. Ben's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in frustration trying to stay contained. There's a difference, he said carefully, between choosing to speak about something and being expected to relive it on demand. That line hit. One of the co-hosts shifted in her seat, glancing between them like a spectator at a tennis match that had turned into something else entirely. Sunny leaned forward again, this time slower. Measured. Do you feel like I'm asking you to relive something? He didn't hesitate. Yes. The word fell heavy. Gasps. Audible this time. Sunny blinked, absorbing it. That's not my intention. I know, he said quickly, though his tone still carried heat. But intention and impact aren't always the same. A subtle shift in the audience, some impressed by the phrasing, others bristling at the tension. Sunny inhaled slowly. Impact goes both ways. Silence. Ben tilted his head slightly. What does that mean? It means, she replied, that when public figures make choices, good or bad, they impact people. Families. Fans. Communities. And sometimes the questions aren't about punishing you. They're about acknowledging that impact. Ben held her gaze. And I have, he said. Over and over. I've apologized. I've taken responsibility. I've stepped away when I needed to. I've done the work privately. Sunny's voice softened, but her eyes remained sharp. But you understand why people might still question. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. Questioning is fair. But there's a point where questioning turns into branding. Branding, she repeated. Yes, he said. You become the guy who messed up. Not the father. Not the filmmaker. Not the person trying to move forward. Just the headline. A ripple through the crowd. The humanizing details, father, filmmaker, shifted the tone. Sunny adjusted in her seat. But you've also benefited from the spotlight. And paid for it, he shot back. The sharpness returned. A co-host tried to interject. Maybe what Sunny is getting at is. No, Ben said firmly, though not shouting. Let's not dilute it. If there's something she wants to ask it. The studio air tightened again. Sunny's jaw set, just slightly. All right, then I'll ask directly. She placed her pen down. There are viewers who feel that celebrities often receive endless second chances. Opportunities that everyday people don't get. Do you believe you've been given more grace than others? The question landed like a hammer. Even the camera seemed to hesitate before cutting to Ben's face. His expression shifted, not defensive this time, but contemplative. I think, he began slowly, that everyone deserves a second chance. That's not what I asked, Sunny said gently. He nodded. I know. He paused. Yes, he continued. I've been fortunate. I've had access to resources, to support systems, to opportunities that not everyone has. I won't deny that. The audience leaned in. But that doesn't make the work less real, he added. It doesn't make the struggle less painful. And it doesn't mean I owe a public replay of my lowest moments every time I promote a movie. Sunny held her ground. No one is asking for a replay. We're asking for reflection. Ben's voice rose, not loud, but edged. And how many times does someone have to reflect before it's enough? There it was again. The snap wasn't explosive. It was cumulative. The buildup of years of interviews, headlines, late-night jokes, social media commentary, all converging under bright studio lights. Sunny's tone cooled. It's not about enough. It's about accountability being ongoing. And growth being allowed, he replied immediately. A beat. Neither blinked. The audience was silent now, not divided, not murmuring. Just still. A producer off stage made another subtle hand gesture. Wrap it up. But neither of them moved. Sunny finally spoke, quieter now. Do you think I'm being unfair? The question wasn't rhetorical. Ben studied her for a moment. The tension shifted again, not gone, but transformed. I think, he said carefully, that sometimes we forget there's a human being sitting here. Not a case study. Not a cultural talking point. A flicker crossed Sunny's face, something like understanding. Or maybe recognition. And sometimes, she replied softly, we forget that viewers are human too. And they carry their own experiences when they watch you. The room exhaled collectively. Ben leaned back slightly, tension easing, but not disappearing. I don't want sympathy, he said. I don't want to avoid hard questions. I just don't want to be reduced to one chapter. Sunny nodded slowly. That's fair. The word felt significant. But the energy in the room hadn't settled entirely. It lingered charged. One co-host attempted to pivot. Let's talk about the film for a moment. But before the transition could fully take hold, an unexpected sound cut through the studio. A single voice from the audience. Own it. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Heads turned instantly. Ben's eyes flicked toward the crowd. Sunny's posture stiffened. Security shifted at the edges of the studio floor. The voice came again, slightly louder. You're a role model. A murmur erupted among the seated audience members. Sunny raised a hand gently. Let's allow the conversation to stay respectful. But the interruption had cracked something open. Ben stood. Not abruptly. Not aggressively. But deliberately. The movement alone sent a wave through the room. He turned slightly toward the audience member, though security had already positioned themselves subtly nearby. "I have owned it," he said, voice projecting now without a microphone adjustment. "Every mistake. Every failure. I've owned it in ways you don't see." The room was frozen. "And I'll keep doing the work," he continued. "But I won't accept the idea that growth has an expiration date where you're never allowed to move beyond your worst decisions." The audience member fell silent. The studio was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the lights again. Sunny remained seated, watching him carefully. "Ben," she said calmly, "no one here is denying growth." He turned back to her. "It feels like it," he said again. But this time there was less anger and more exhaustion. The cameras captured everything. The tightness in his eyes. The steadiness in hers. The audience caught between empathy and critique. Daytime television had transformed into something raw. Unscripted. Unfiltered. Ben slowly sat back down. Sunny folded her hands again. For a moment, neither spoke. And in that silence, something shifted. This wasn't about winning anymore. It wasn't about headlines or gotcha moments. It was about two people standing at opposite ends of a very public conversation, trying clumsily and intensely to find the line between accountability and humanity. Sunny finally broke the silence. "I appreciate you staying in this conversation." Ben gave a small nod. "I almost didn't." A ripple through the audience. "But I did," he added, "because walking away would have been easier." Sunny met his eyes. "And harder in the long run." A faint, reluctant half-smile touched his face. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had evolved. And yet, outside those studio walls, millions were watching, clipping, posting, reacting in real time. And what had begun as a tense exchange was about to become something much bigger. Because in the age of viral moments, context is fragile. By the time the show cut to its final segment, something irreversible had already happened. By the time the show cut to its final segment, something irreversible had already happened. Not a scandal. Not a meltdown. A fracture. And fractures under pressure spread. The control room at The View was in quiet chaos. Producers whispered over headsets. Clips were already being marked. Social media monitors glowed with rising engagement numbers. The words Ben Affleck were climbing fast. Back at the table, Ben Affleck sat straighter than before, hands clasped, knuckles pale but steady. The earlier heat in his voice had cooled into something sharper. More focused. Less reactive. Across from him, Sunny Hostin had shifted too. She wasn't pressing now. She was observing. But tension doesn't disappear just because the volume lowers. It compresses. One of the co-hosts attempted again to redirect the energy. "Let's talk about the emotional depth in the new film. There's a scene, no spoilers, where your character confronts regret in a very direct way." Ben nodded. "Yeah. Was that difficult to film?" There was a beat. A long one. "It was," he said finally. "Because regret is something you don't act. You remember." The audience was quiet. The earlier restlessness had turned into stillness. Sunny watched him carefully. "Do you think regret has shaped you more than success?" It wasn't accusatory this time. It was probing. Ben exhaled slowly. "Yes." The simplicity of the answer shifted the atmosphere again. "Yes," he repeated. "Success can make you louder. Regret makes you quieter." No one interrupted. "And when you're quiet," he continued, "you actually hear yourself. You hear the damage. You hear the consequences." Sunny tilted her head slightly. "Then why react so strongly when those consequences are brought up?" There it was again. Not confrontational, but unrelenting. Ben didn't snap this time. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers interlocked. "Because," he said, voice low, "there's a difference between acknowledging something and being defined by it forever." Sunny didn't look away. "But who defines you?" The question hung heavier than any before it. Ben's lips parted slightly, but no words came at first. The camera zoomed in, close enough to see the flicker behind his eyes. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it feels like the narrative does." A murmur from the audience. Sunny responded gently. "Narratives are powerful, but so are actions." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. A beat. And sometimes," he added, "you can do everything right for years, and one mistake still outweighs it in public memory." Sunny's gaze softened just slightly. "Is that what this feels like to you? An imbalance?" "Yes." The word wasn't sharp anymore. It was tired. There was something different now, less edge, more vulnerability. Sunny folded her hands. You know, when I ask these questions, I'm not trying to corner you. I know, he replied. Then what are you reacting to? Silence. He looked out toward the audience, not searching for approval, but gathering his thoughts. I'm reacting, he said slowly, to the feeling that no matter what I say, it won't be enough. That people want a perfect answer to an imperfect life. The audience shifted again, not in discomfort, but in recognition. Sunny leaned back slightly. There is no perfect answer. Exactly. A faint ripple of understanding passed between them. But tension doesn't evaporate all at once. It lingers in tone, in breath, in posture. A producer's voice crackled faintly in Sunny's earpiece. Wrap in 5. She nodded subtly. Let me ask you something, she said, her voice quieter now, more personal. If you could speak to the version of yourself that made those mistakes, what would you say? Ben blinked. For the first time all morning, he looked caught off guard, not by confrontation, but by introspection. I'd say, he began slowly, you're not invincible. The audience leaned in. I'd say your talent doesn't protect you from consequences. Your fame doesn't protect the people around you. And your pride will cost you more than your critics ever could. Sunny didn't interrupt. And I'd say, he continued, voice thickening slightly, get help sooner. Don't wait until the damage forces you to. The room was silent. No murmurs. No whispers. Just stillness. Sunny's expression shifted. No longer analytical, but human. That's powerful, she said softly. Ben gave a small shrug, almost dismissive. It's honest. There it was again. Honesty. But honesty on live television is unpredictable. Sunny nodded slowly. I respect that. A pause. And for what it's worth, she added, these conversations aren't about trapping someone in their past. They're about understanding how growth happens. Ben met her eyes. Growth happens privately, he said. But judgment happens publicly. Sunny absorbed that. And yet, she replied carefully, you chose a public life. And I accept that, he said quickly. But choosing a public career doesn't mean forfeiting humanity. A faint applause began, soft, then growing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't thunderous. But it was unified. The earlier division in the audience had softened into something closer to shared understanding. Sunny glanced briefly toward the control room camera. Time was nearly up. Last question, she said. Do you think today's conversation was unfair? Ben didn't hesitate this time. No. A subtle shift across the panel. It was uncomfortable, he added. But not unfair. Sunny nodded. Uncomfortable conversations are sometimes necessary. Yeah, he agreed quietly. They are. There was a beat, one that felt less like tension and more like acknowledgement. But just as the atmosphere seemed to settle, a notification sound echoed faintly from somewhere in the studio. Not from the stage. From the audience. A phone screen lighting up. Then another. And another. The social media team in the control room stiffened. Clips were already circulating. Not the thoughtful answers. Not the reflective moments. The snap. The line. Sitting behind a desk and reducing someone's entire life to headlines. That was the one spreading. The camera cut to a wide shot of the panel. Sunny's posture was composed. Ben's expression was neutral. But behind the scenes, producers were scrolling rapidly. Trending. Clipped. Captioned. Debated. Outside the studio walls, narratives were already forming, without the nuance of the full conversation. Ben glanced toward the audience again, noticing the subtle glow of screens. He understood immediately. Sunny saw it too. This is why context matters, she said quietly, almost to herself. Ben gave a small, knowing nod. Context rarely trends, he replied. The line hung in the air. The director's voice rang out. And that's a wrap. Applause filled the studio again. But this time it was different. Less nervous. More reflective. Ben stood, extending a hand toward Sunny. She took it. The handshake wasn't performative. It wasn't exaggerated. It was steady. Professional. But cameras were still snapping photos. And outside, the internet had already chosen its sides. Some praised him. Some criticized him. Some accused Sunny of pushing too hard. Others accused Ben of deflecting. The fracture hadn't shattered into chaos. But it had cracked wide enough for the world to peer inside. As Ben stepped off stage, jacket draped over his arm, a producer approached quietly. You're trending, she whispered. He gave a faint, weary smile. Of course I am. Across the stage, Sunny removed her earpiece slowly. Another producer leaned in. It's blowing up. She nodded once. I figured. Neither looked shocked. But both understood something profound. The real confrontation wasn't on that stage. It was about to happen everywhere else. On screens, in headlines, in comment sections, and when the narrative escapes the room, you no longer control it. Part 3 wasn't the climax. It was the ignition. And outside those studio walls, the fire was just beginning to spread. By the time the studio lights dimmed and the audience filtered out into the bright New York afternoon, the moment no longer belonged to the stage. It belonged to the world. Clips from The View were everywhere. Not the full exchange. Not the quiet reflection. Not the handshake at the end. Just the snap. Sitting behind a desk and reducing someone's entire life to headlines. That was the clip. That was the caption. That was the wildfire. Within an hour, Ben Affleck was trending across multiple platforms. Reaction videos were multiplying. Commentators were dissecting his tone, his posture, the exact second his jaw tightened. Was it justified frustration? Or ego flaring under pressure? Across town, in a quiet car pulling away from the studio, Ben sat in the back seat staring at his phone. He didn't need to scroll. The notifications wouldn't let him ignore it. Ben destroys host live on air. Ben melts down when confronted. Ben finally snaps. He exhaled slowly, pressing his thumb against the dark screen until it went black. In another building, just blocks away, Sunny Hostin sat in a conference room with producers. A large monitor replayed the segment on loop. "Freeze it there," one producer said. The screen paused on the exact moment Ben leaned forward, eyes intense. "People are saying you pushed too hard." Sunny didn't flinch. "That's my job," she replied calmly. Another producer chimed in. "But the narrative online is splitting. Some are saying he was brave. Others are calling it deflection." Sunny folded her hands. It was a conversation. But the internet doesn't do conversations. It does sides. By evening, hashtags had evolved. Think pieces appeared. Commentators framed it as a larger cultural debate. Are celebrities perpetually punished or perpetually protected? The nuance of the exchange, the vulnerability, the admission of regret, the acknowledgement of privilege, was buried beneath headlines engineered for impact. Back in his home, Ben sat alone in his living room, the city skyline glowing beyond the glass. The television was muted, but captions rolled beneath looping footage of the exchange. He watched himself lean forward. He watched the flash in his eyes. He watched the moment people were calling the snap. But what he saw wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. A phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from a friend. "You good?" He typed back a single word. "Yeah." Across social media, celebrities subtly weighed in. Some posted vague quotes about growth. Others emphasized accountability. The debate expanded beyond two people at a table. It became symbolic. Morning talk shows replayed the clip. Late-night hosts joked about it. Pundits analyzed body language frame by frame. But something unexpected began happening. Longer clips started surfacing. Not the sharp line, the reflective answer. "If I could speak to that version of myself, I'd say you're not invincible." People began sharing that too. The comment sections shifted from outrage to discussion. "I actually watched the full segment," one viral post read. "It wasn't a meltdown. It was uncomfortable honesty." Another user replied, "Sunny wasn't wrong either." The polarization softened slightly. The next day, during the live broadcast of The View, Sunny addressed it directly. She sat at the table, calm but resolute. "Yesterday's conversation sparked strong reactions," she began. "That's okay. Difficult discussions often do." The camera cut briefly to a still image of her and Ben mid-exchange. "My role is to ask questions viewers are thinking," she continued. And his role was to answer as he saw fit. It was a real moment. And I respect that. No defensiveness. No apology. Just clarity. Later that afternoon, Ben released a brief statement through his publicist. It wasn't combative. It wasn't dramatic. It read, "Growth isn't always comfortable to talk about. I appreciate the space to have real conversations, even when they're tough." That was it. No attack. No blame. Just a reframing. The media cycle, however, wasn't done. Panel discussions debated whether celebrities should expect hard questioning as part of their platform. Others asked whether public redemption is ever truly granted. But beneath the noise, something more subtle had happened. Viewers who had only seen the viral clip went back and watched the full segment. They saw Sunny ask, "Do you think today was unfair?" They saw him answer, "No." Uncomfortable, but not unfair. They saw the handshake. And slowly, the narrative matured. Not completely, but enough. In interviews weeks later, Ben would reference that morning without resentment. He described it as intense, but necessary. Sunny, too, would mention it as an example of why live television matters. Because in a world curated by edits and filters, raw moments cut deeper. The aftermath didn't destroy careers. It didn't create enemies, but it exposed something real. The tension between accountability and humanity, between public expectation and private growth, between asking hard questions and hearing hard answers. Months later, a clip resurfaced again, but this time with a different caption. Two adults having a real conversation. The comments were calmer, thoughtful, reflective, and maybe that was the true aftermath. Not the trending spike, not the headlines, but the lingering conversation it sparked in living rooms, in comment threads, in people questioning how they judge others. Back in the studio weeks after the confrontation, the atmosphere felt normal again. Bright lights, polished table, structured segments. But anyone who had watched that exchange knew something had shifted. Live television had reminded viewers that authenticity is messy, that growth is imperfect, that accountability and empathy can collide without either being the villain. And maybe that's why the moment endured. Not because someone snapped, but because someone refused to be reduced. And someone else refused to stop asking. Now we want to hear from you. Was Ben justified in pushing back? Did Sunny go too far, or exactly far enough? Do celebrities deserve endless scrutiny, or room to evolve? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have the conversation. And if you want more explosive, cinematic breakdowns of the moments that shake Hollywood and beyond, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most dramatic moments aren't scripted. They're live, and you never know when the next fracture is about to begin.